as I promised, two incredible guests on the show today, and the information that these gentlemen are about to give me could have an enormously positive effect on the entirety of the travel industry as we know it right now, an industry that we know has been decimated by the effects of COVID-19. My guests on the show today, so excited about this, have told me about a revolutionary piece of equipment that could change the game for the whole world. Let's just focus on the cruise industry for today. This is a bigger picture altogether, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. A previous guest of mine, come on a few weeks ago, Mr. Damien O'Connor. He is now the Executive Vice President and General Manager of VIKAND, and Mr. Peter Hult, the President and CEO of VIKAND. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Sam.
How are you? Both well?
Great, fantastic. Thank you. It's good to hear your voice again.
Yeah, good to see you too. I'm pretty excited about this because this is so gratefully to you both, a world exclusive. Thank you so much for choosing Travel.Radio to be the place that you reveal this to the entire world. Peter, first of all, can you tell us who is VIKAND and what they do?
Well, thank you, Sam. So just very briefly, VIKAND is a maritime healthcare and public health company providing medical services on board, public health services and COVID-19 services to about 28 cruise lines today in various forms. And as you can imagine, this past year has been quite an interesting year in the healthcare space in the maritime industry that has helped us understand the need for a structured and very focused approach to the healthcare on board ships, as well as looking at solutions into the future of how we can resolve the need for safe environment for the COVID situation as well. So in brief, we are a healthcare services provider. Most cruise lines are using VIKAND in managing the medical center on board, as well as the policies and procedures and everything else that is going into managing the medical operations today, which is more important than ever.
And it was already massive, wasn't it, Peter, health on board ships?
It is incredibly important on board ships. And it's an area with the new regulations, new requirements, new return to sailing issues, meeting the regulatory standards of various jurisdictions around the world. It is an incredibly complex environment and requires a lot of expertise to be able to resolve it.
Oh, yeah, we'll touch on some of the finer points that we discussed earlier in a minute or so. Damien, the information you gave me prior to this interview is potentially a game changer, as said, in the cruise industry and for the rest of the world also. But as I said, we will keep to the cruise industry for this today, as I know you guys are pretty busy. Can you share with us what you think the missing piece is in the resumption of the cruising plan?
Yeah. So first of all, great to be back, Sam. And, I'm here talking to you with a very different hat on today. Last time we had a conversation, I was working with Silver Sea Cruises, part of the Royal Caribbean Group, and we focused very much on how we managed the pandemic right at the beginning, back in February and March last year, and how we've spent the last few months working on what we're calling our Healthy Return to Service plan. And not just within those groups, right, but within really every brand around the world, big, small, expedition, classic, whatever it is, about how we're getting back into service and how quickly and safely we can get back into service. So that's happening, right? There are cruise lines operating today. I told you last time that we spoke that we had operated a charter in Saudi Arabia, which was really successful, and that we have ships going out of Italy at the moment, Canary Islands, in Singapore. There's a couple of cruise lines operating, but the proposition of cruising now is not great, right? It's lovely to imagine that you can get on board and have a really great experience that these cruise lines are giving. But regardless of the amazing results that are happening with the vaccine around the world, there is still a problem. There is going to continue to be a problem. And part of getting on board a cruise ship today, or convincing a government or a health authority around the world, is that you're tested and that you're vaccinated or that you're coming on board with a negative result. And the only way to do that today really is through PCR testing or antigen testing. And, in very simple terms, PCR testing today is very accurate, pretty accurate. Antigen testing is less accurate. So there's a missing link. There's something that can be done at the terminal that will give you a really good indication if you're taking something on board that we don't want on board. And that's for guest or for crew. And today, the PCR testing, you know, Sam, you've been there. I had my 10th PCR test last week. It's not a nice situation, right? It's not something that we want to have done. And when you're booking that vacation and thinking about sipping a pina colada on the open deck, you're thinking about getting there. And the journey for us starts from the second that you leave your door to the second you get back on your door. And there's very, very stringent requirements. So when Peter started talking to me about this technology some months ago, and I've lived through this, you've lived through this, Sam and Peter. And by the way, Peter, I was a customer of Peter's for the last couple of years with Silversea. Peter and his team provided the medical services for our last company. When we started talking about missing links and how we could make this a better proposition for our guests and our crew to get back on board, Peter started talking to me about a new technology. And I was so taken by it. I was so excited about it. I quit my job and came to work for him, right? So after 30 years in the cruise industry, I found something that is driving my personal need to get our crew members back on board our ships, to try to get all of the port workers back, that, you know, the hundreds of thousands of people that are connected to our industry that are out of work at the moment. The entertainment industry, Sam, you know very well. I mean, there's just so many people involved with our industry, and not to mention our travel community, the most important people, right? The people that are going to fill our ships again. Yep. So when I heard about this is my opportunity to not work for a cruise line, but to work for the industry in general, and for the shoreside support staff. And that's how I'm driven. That's completely my drive, is to get this industry. You know, I was telling you last time, Sam, I delivered 2 brand new ships last year. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful ships. And they haven't had a single guest on board them, right? $1 billion investment that's sitting in port in Marseille that hasn't had a single guest. And that's heartbreaking. It's terrible. And we need to change that. So that's why I'm doing it. And I think the most important part of the conversation is you're going to ask me, what is it? What is the new technology, right?
You're reading my mind, Damien. You're reading my mind. It's all about, you said before, about people getting on the ship and having those tests, sticking those swabs up their nose, down their throat. It's uncomfortable for anybody at any time. So what's the solution for this? There's got to be a better proposition.
Okay, so we are working. And by the way, it's an almost proven technology that we have CE certification in Europe at the moment. We are in the process of gaining FDA approval for this system, but it's a breathalyzer test that is equal to a PCR test. That is a 45-second resulting test that will give you a day one indication of COVID.
So even if you're asymptomatic before you come through the symptoms, so because that's been the killer, hasn't it? You've never been able to detect it in those first 5 days, and you can tell on day one.
So we really believe to have a safer and a more effective environment that you have to do the test at the terminal. I think it's fine to have a PCR test prior to coming, but there's a lot of interaction between the PCR test and getting to the terminal. So the technology that we're working with has a throughput of 100 tests per hour, which is 10 times what's available today with a PCR test. It's non-intrusive. It's blowing twice into a little tube. It's not a medical device, so it doesn't need medical personnel to operate the machine. It's portable. It can be utilized for different cruise lines, for different terminals within the same port. It can be utilized on board. And with requirements today that not only you need this test to get on board the ship, in many, many countries, the requirement, certainly within the US at the moment, is that you need the test to get off the ship.
Yeah.
And this will allow us to do it. You know, when you're looking at scenarios of trying to do an at-terminal test for thousands of people, it's more or less impossible.
So would you consider having a few machines for every embarkation, disembarkation, excursion, because people want to get on and off the ships?
Yeah, we're not talking about one machine. We're talking about multiple machines that will allow us to more or less provide the same sort of embarkation experience that we're used to and that our guests really need. It's not a pleasant experience getting on a cruise ship unless you're in a purpose-built terminal, and they're mostly in the big cities, Barcelona, Miami, Fort Lauderdale. But we're talking about hundreds of ports of call. I mean, Silversea alone has 900 different destinations. So you have to have a system that's portable, a system that's really fast and gets you out. Like I say, it's really easy to do in a big custom-built terminal. It's not easy to do all around the world. This system, this solution, a machine the size of a suitcase that gives you a result in 45 seconds that we're working to improve, by the way, and it will improve as the technology grows, is a game changer. And I know we're talking about the maritime industry today, but I don't need to talk about what it means for the rest of the world and not just cruising, right?
That's incredible.
Let's talk about commercial shipping, yachting, cargo, you name it, fishing, right? All of these maritime industries that need to get back into business and that require testing today.
Well, it's effectively anywhere that has a crowd. And that's it. That's simple correct. As that. Football stadiums, theatres, this will change the entertainment, the hospitality. Anybody, anywhere that can get one of these tests will know within, how long did you say you get results in?
45 seconds.
45 seconds.
You're blowing into a small little tube. 45 seconds later, you can have the result. It's non-invasive, very easy. And that's really what is the magic with this solution. In addition, we're partnered with Intercruises to manage the actual testing in each of the terminals. So we can work with the cruise lines, the ports, as well as the terminal operators to set this up in a very easy way. It's very scalable and very easy to move around to various terminals, and it's very affordable. The cost is less than what you're paying for an antigen test today, and that is not bad.
Wow, what is the room for discrepancy within the machine? Is there any?
There's very little. It's equivalent to what you're doing with a PCR test today. It has a very high accuracy.
When you're boarding a cruise ship, Damien, the time it takes to get on normally is pretty formidable. Under testing circumstances, one would assume that it would take a hell of a lot longer now to get on board a cruise ship than it did before. Is that the case with your apparatus?
Yeah, all the cruise lines, Sam, are trying to achieve or have been trying to achieve what we like to call a no check-in, right? So we take line busting exercises and we look, first of all, at the bigger ships, right? The smaller ships is not a problem because we pretty much manage the way that the guests come to the terminals with the small, and that's usually with individual private pickups. But when you're talking about the really big ships, when you get to the 3,000, the 6,000 passengers, first of all, the goal is for there not to be queues at the terminal. That's just a horrible experience. Always has been in the cruise industry. And many companies have pioneered the no check-in. So you're doing everything online. You're getting everything that you needed to done, and whether that's a health questionnaire or your boarding pass and going paperless, environmental issues has always been one for us. So most of the companies are really good at that today. They've really reduce the time that when you get to the terminal, you're on board. We used to say sidewalk to stateroom, and we wanted to achieve that in 5 minutes. So you get to the terminal, you drop your car off, you drop your luggage, and you're at your stateroom in 5 minutes. That's going to change. We're going to go backwards a little bit with this testing because we will have to stagger embarkation. You'll most likely have an embarkation appointment. So we're not having people turning up. And that will be, in many cases, in partnership with the port. You'll arrive and you'll only be allowed to come. So we will have 500 people per hour or, less or more, but a manageable situation that we can ensure that you come at your appointment time for checking in and that we can get you through the terminal really safely. Of course, we have to set up our terminals differently now. Your luggage has to go a different way. There'll be your first screening, which will be the breathalyzer screening. There will be positive cases. We absolutely know that it's going to happen, but we'll catch them at the terminal and you'll go for a secondary screening probably and a health questionnaire, much as you do today, right? We've been doing this screening for norovirus forever, and we pretty much have it under control. And by the way, one of the great things about this technology is that when we're not talking about COVID anymore, which is hopefully very soon, we will utilize the machine for other things like testing for norovirus or flu. or drug and alcohol. So this is an investment that will keep on giving as we start to talk about new things. So I don't think the experience is going to be terribly affected, the check-in time. We will manage that really well. We'll work with the ports. And as Peter mentioned, we're partnering here with Intercruises, who are just a wonderful group of people to work with that are as excited, if not more, about what we're talking about. And we'll make this the most appealing proposition to the future guests and crew, right? I mean, we've got to get these thousands of crew back on board our ships. Every ship in the world is operating with what we call emergency layup manning at the moment. So we have to get thousands of crew members back safely before we can even consider getting a guest on board.
The cruise industry alone is a multi-billion-dollar economy. And just that by itself, this is going to change the game. How soon can this happen, Peter?
We're ready to go. So when we have an agreement with a port, terminal, or a cruise line operator, we can set up the first terminal testing within 45 days to 60 days, I would say. I just want to come back to one, just in summary, in terms of what's expected on the testing into the future, right? So just generally for your listeners, what can be expected? What we know today is that you will have to do a PCR test before you leave home on a general basis. So you need to do a PCR test, you need to be negative, then you're traveling to the port where you're going to embark the vessel. Today, some cruise lines do PCR testing, others are doing antigen testing when you get to the terminal. Those tests takes a long time. The antigen test is not as accurate as the PCR test, but also with the PCR test, you have to do the nasal swab, which is quite uncomfortable. That is the point where we're going to replace that with a breathalyzer test that is very quick, 45 seconds, highly accurate, non-invasive, affordable. And then when you come on board the vessel, many cruise line operators would either have daily testing or every second day or mid-cruise testing. So we can replace that with a highly accurate breathalyzer test, non-invasive again, and much more convenient than the PCR testing and the antigen testing. And again, when you disembark, you will have to do testing again. Here's the critical component of all of this. Testing, it sounds really boring, but I will be honest with you. If I were to take a cruise today, I would want to take a cruise where I feel that they're doing good testing because I want to be safe on board, right? And this is a vehicle with which we can create a very safe environment at a very affordable rate, at a high accuracy, and you're almost not inconvenienced at all. The moment you start to do PCR testing, you are quite inconvenienced. Now, we understand that there is a place for PCR testing from a diagnostic standpoint, and I think that's great. But using it from a screening standpoint is really not a good approach, especially when you're taking medical staff out of the healthcare systems where they can treat people who are sick and moving them into managing a testing environment to join a cruise ship. We feel it's much more sensible to use a breathalyzer test with all of the benefits that we have from that, and then alleviate medical staff to do what they need to do, and that is to treat people in medical facilities.
And there's still that 5-day discrepancy where you wouldn't know under normal testing conditions now. This could be changing the course of history, gentlemen.
We think so. And just to clarify on the timing, so PCR test, you normally could get a reasonably good, accurate result within, let's say, 2 to 3 days to 5 days.
Yeah.
But with the antigen testing, in many cases, you almost need to be symptomatic before you can get a reasonably accurate test result. With the breathalyzer test, it's day one. It's a few hours after you've been infected. And then, of course, it increases over the next few days, but you have a much earlier detection system, which we think is incredibly valuable.
So this is an assumption. I'm throwing you an assumption here. When do you think this will let the cruise industry start rolling again?
So Damien, I mean, we've talked about this, Damien and I, and I think there's, as we know, there is some cruise line operating today. They're doing it with the best tools available to them today. We think that we can create a really safe environment, start April, May. We can see this really rolling out. We see really strong partnership happening in Spain, in the UK, in France, in Greece, and Italy. And I think over time, when the cruise industry opens up in the US, we will see this technology being moved over here as well. And again, coming back to Damien's point, we're talking about the cruise industry today, but really being able to go back and visit a theater, watching football or soccer, depending on where the listeners are. This is really important, and something that's really dear to our heart. The commercial shipping industry is the lifeblood of global commerce. This is another way for us to make sure that seafarers generally are safe around the world, and I think that's an important aspect as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things you asked at the beginning, Sam, was what was the missing piece, but I think the cruise companies have done a magnificent job in a short time of doing what they need to do on board. And it's millions of dollars investment in air systems, right? HEPA filters, changing out recirculated air to fresh air systems, putting in intensive care units, isolation units, millions and millions of dollars, right? But cruise ships naturally have an environment that we can control this. Guest to space ratio. It's not like sitting in a crowded restaurant. It's massive ratio of space to guests. It is the ability to physically distance. And I say physically distance because I think the word social distancing is an anti-hospitality, right? So all of these things that we can really control on board the cruise ship, but there was a missing piece. Because you can do whatever you want on board, right? You can manage on board, and we have the staff, we have the leadership, we have the ability to manage people on board. But if you don't do something before they get on board, it's all a waste of time. You've wasted all of that money, you've wasted all of that effort. So this, to me, was the missing piece, the piece that really is important. And the vaccine, it's looking really positive, Sam. I read the news in the UK every day, and I think you hit 15 million last week, which is absolutely fantastic. And the vaccine is the way out of this, but we don't see that the vaccine, I personally don't feel it's going to stop the need for testing anytime soon, and that is something we have to live with. But it's so promising. The vaccine is coming on. Every country is showing really positive signs with it. It's working. We're going to get it at some point. You'll get it much before me, Sam. You're in that tier 2, I think. So, but the vaccine will happen, but testing is going to be something that we're going to have to live with for a long time.
That's right.
Gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough for choosing Travel.Radio to give us this world exclusive. And we've got everything crossed that this is a huge success for you, because the ramifications from you will be global. They'll be colossal. Putting so many people back to work, putting an economy that I said at the beginning has been decimated back in, putting some coal under that fire again. Incredible. We'll watch this space and we'll see how it goes. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Peter Hult, Damien O'Connor of VIKAND. Thank you, gentlemen. This is Travel.Radio. I am over the moon. Have a great day, gents.
Thank you, Sam. Love to the family.